Hello, everyone. We're going to get started here in just a second as people get into the room. And while we do that, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Okay. All right. Well, we'll go ahead and get this program started because it's going to be a full one. Welcome to this April 2025 C2C Care webinar. We're happy to see everyone back in the C2C Care world. I'm going to start by doing a couple of quick programming notes, some technical updates, and then we're going to go ahead and hand this off to our presenter today. You are here for advancements in data loggers for environmental monitoring. We'll be running from 1 to 2 p.m. Eastern, just so everyone knows kind of the timeline for today's program. My name is Robin Bauer-Kilgo. I am the C2C Care Coordinator. You can reach me about any questions you have on the program at that email address, c2cc@culturalheritage.org. And I'm located just outside of Washington, D.C. in Silver Spring, Maryland. I actually need to update this slide, and I just realized that. This is connecting to collections.org. This is our old website. We have a new website, which has streamlined things quite a lot. I hope you guys will go take a look at it. The domain is exactly the same, but we've now brought our website into a slightly more modern look, where you can take a look at upcoming programming, links to our community, and a link to the courses that we're holding. So I encourage you to go take a look at that website whenever you have a chance. We also have 2 homes on social media where you can see programming notes coming up for our programming. One is on Facebook at the C2C community, and then also on LinkedIn, where we post underneath the larger AIC, FAIC umbrella. So I'd encourage you to follow both of those social media accounts. A programming note for C2C Care, and I'll just also add that, as you might have seen in our community before I talk about this program, we have not actually been able to access our IMLS grant funding, which is how originally C2C Care was funded since the DOGE takeover of IMLS a few weeks ago. We do want to thank an anonymous donor and the Samuel H. Kress Foundation for stepping in to support this webinar and other C2C Care programming, allowing it to continue through the summer. If you are able to join them in supporting C2C Care, please consider donating. I'm going to put a link in the chat once we're done here, but we're kind of a grassroots program now, everyone, because of what's been happening with the federal government. So I do just want to send out a huge thanks to those anonymous donors and the Kress Foundation for stepping forward. We are going to be able to continue our programming through the summer, which is when our original grant was ending. So again, thank you for that. So with that in mind, I'm going to talk a little bit about our next scheduled grant or our next scheduled program, which is part of the annual May Day celebration that we do every year. It's always weird to say celebration, but it is. May Day is basically that one time in the year where people can go take a look at their emergency plans and do some disaster planning for their organization. So with that, we've partnered with the FAIC Emergency Program to do a May 6th webinar called So Now What? Disposal of Materials After Disaster. We have a couple people coming to talk about kind of once the disaster happens, we have all these materials, both collections items, packaging items, all that. And the real question is, how do we dispose of these safely across the different media types? So we have a couple people coming in to talk about kind of methods and experiences they have had. So I would encourage you to sign up for that free program if you have a chance. And just a quick technical reminder for today's program, we are using this fabulous thing called Zoom webinar. So with that, you are able to interact with us via the chat, which it looks like people are doing very well. So thank you again for doing the chat in there. The chat is really there for people to say hello, maybe where they're located. As I like to say, people like to talk about the weather a lot there. So if you want to talk about the weather, feel free to talk about the weather. And you can also communicate with us any kind of technical issues you are having with the program. We have also enabled the Q&A button. The Q&A button is really there for questions. So if you have a question at any point during the program, please type it in that Q&A box. We will track them and then answer them during the Q&A period. It just makes it a little easier for us when we come to that section. We are also recording today's session, so if you have to drop out early, no worries. We will have the recording up within a day or so of the actual program. And finally, we have enabled captioning. So if you'd like that service, you can click on that CC button at the bottom of the screen, and we have a captioner working diligently away as we speak. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and hand this over to our speaker today. Her name is Rachel Perkins Ehrenstein. She's founding partner of AM Art Conservation, and she's going to be leading us through some of the advancements that have happened in the world of data loggers over the past while. Rachel's actually started working on these programs over a decade ago, I think even longer than that. So she's going to give us kind of where we are with that technology, how it's useful, and how you guys can kind of approach it when it comes to looking at various data loggers. So Rachel, feel free to take over whenever you're ready.
Thanks so much, Robin. Give me a second to make sure I'm sharing the right screen. Does that look good to you?
Everything looks perfect.
Terrific. Well, thank you everyone for joining us today. I am pleased to have this opportunity to revisit a topic I've covered in the past for the Connecting to Collections Care community. And but before I continue, I want to express my appreciation for Robin and for the volunteers who powered the C2C Care community, the Foundation for Advancement in Conservation, which has shepherded this resource for years, the Institute for Museum and Library Services, which until its recent gutting supported the site and other critical programs for our field. And now I also want to thank the Crest Foundation and the other anonymous donors who have stepped up to support this important platform. So my love of data loggers goes back to the beginning of my career in conservation almost 30 years ago, or as my children call it, the olden days. And when I think about the technology we now have, it really does feel like a lot of time has passed and it makes me feel old. However, as I sort of dove back into the topic to prepare for today, and looked back at some of the past webinars and workshops and lectures on this topic, it is really remarkable how much has changed and yet how little in other ways things have changed. So as I discussed the outline for today's program with Robin and the C2C Care Advisory Committee, we wanted to ensure that we weren't reinventing the wheel. From the first leaflet I wrote on data loggers in, I think it was 2000, that eventually became the Conservagram 3/3, it was clear to me that the minute something was published, it was going to be outdated if the focus was really on a specific product. So in creating the 2012 and 2016 webinars on standalone data loggers and then wireless environmental monitoring, I really tried to focus on how to identify your needs and how to understand the available technology and how to match the two to pick a product that is useful for your situation. So here is what I am not going to cover today. I am not going to give a broad overview of the kinds of equipment that have historically been used for monitoring. I am not going to explain what data loggers are and how they work. If you want to understand more about hardware specifications or software features to think about, please go look at that March 2012 webinar. I will not go into depth on understanding the technology and terminology of wireless monitors. That's pretty much covered in the 2016. And I'm not going to give general tips on monitoring, like how to set up a logger, where to put them, how many. That is also covered in either or both of the 2012 and 2016 webinars, which you can access from the C2C Care archives on the beautiful new site that Robin showed us. What I do plan to cover today is highlighting some of the products that people are using, and I'll tell you why I think those are names, some of which we've seen for a long time and are going to be familiar to us, and others that are new and sort of intriguing. We'll talk about identifying some of the changes that we've seen in these products in the past decade and some trends for the future. So, Robin, how many people do we have on at the moment?
Looks like 177 attendees right now.
Fabulous. So many of you participated in a little survey form. Thank you for those of you who filled that out. We had about 95 registrants who put in information on your data logging habits or lack thereof. And then I'm going to sort of use that information as part of our presentation. So just to start us off, out of the sort of almost 100 people, we had roughly 80% who are currently using Dataloggers. Almost 20% are not, and a few who were not sure of what the status is in their institution. So for the almost 20% who aren't using some sort of logger, most of you identified hygrothermographs or hygrometers as the equipment you're using. A few people just put down pen and paper, which I'm assuming means that you're recording on some sort of chart or log information that you're getting from, some sort of piece of equipment like this, and a hygrometer, which is just giving you a current reading. I hope that this C2C Care webinar and maybe some of the others that we'll talk about today will allow you to feel comfortable jumping into the 21st century. When I was in graduate school, we learned how to use a psychrometer and the associated slide rule to calculate relative humidity from wet and dry bulb readings. At that point, hygrothermographs were pretty high tech. And for a long time, hygrothermographs were great. But I'm going to take a bold stand now and say enough. If you're still using hygrothermographs, it's time to move on. If you're using hygrometers that don't actually log your data, it is time to upgrade. There are a lot of products out there that are cheap enough and accurate enough that if you're going to spend any money or any time, you should have a product that produces usable data. And paper charts, especially if you allow them to go around and around and around for weeks and months or years, and a log sheet with like one data point on weekdays or a printout of a graph is not usable data for analysis. So for those of you who said that you were not yet logging, and the follow-up question was then, what would help you, what is sort of preventing you from transitioning to Dataloggers? The results weren't much of a surprise. It seems that most people are overwhelmed by options and not sure what to choose. And so hopefully, again, the webinars that are on the C2C Care site are going to help you with that. The second thing that's mentioned frequently is cost. And, again, now there are so many options that are not just reasonably priced, but even cheap. We sometimes have people who feel like they're technologically challenged, but if you can figure out Zoom and if you can manage your mobile phone, there are products that are easy enough for you to use. And then I think the other component is a fear about the time to manage an environmental monitoring program. And again, a program is meant to meet your needs. And so, finding a balance between how many loggers you have, how often you download the data, how often you look and, analyze your data are all things that you should feel empowered to make work for you. You're all here today, so presumably I don't need to convince you that monitoring is important, but I do want to quickly review a few reasons why I think it's important to document and understand the environment in which we store and exhibit our collections. And I believe these are true no matter how large or small an institution you are. The data you collect is important in decision-making for the long-term preservation of your collections and of your building. The data is going to help you understand the conditions to which your collections have become acclimated. Then it will help you predict how they might react when those conditions are changed, or age if the conditions, maybe remain the same and are less than ideal. Having data on your spaces will allow you to make smart decisions on where you store your pieces, even if you're choosing between not ideal options. And the data will help you analyze how well your building envelope is acting as the first line of defense in protecting your collections. And if you have them, whether your air handling units or air conditioning are performing to the best of their ability. Data is powerful in supporting fundraising efforts to show that you're addressing a documented need, whether it be for large projects like upgrading HVAC or small, like purchasing boxes to buffer collections. And if you're interested in cutting costs or being ecologically sustainable, you need this data. I want to point out that AIC's latest quarterly newsletter has an important article written by the Sustainability Committee in collaboration with AIC's Preventive Care Network. It's a comprehensive overview of indoor set points, past and present, and the considerations and ramifications involved in changing them, from building systems to loan agreements. It highlights the evolving standards from 70 degrees and 50% RH set points to last year's BISO Green Protocol. The article also highlights some upcoming tools from the Canadian Conservation Institute and other organizations working on elements of managing environments for the safety of our planet and our collections. I am, however, sorry to say that some of the initiatives mentioned in the newsletter article have lost their funding due to recent administrative actions. So a few of the future resources will take longer to come to fruition. There's also some great webinars on the C2C Care site that focus on the bigger picture of why we monitor and what to do with the data we collect. And I highly recommend watching these important webinars as part of your research and on this topic. And I'm going to come back to a few of them, but particularly demystifying environmental data, which was recently presented on March of this year. And I also will mention, and I think Robin said this also, that when I will be providing the PowerPoint with the full script as well. That will go on the site along with the recording, and so all of these hot links that are here will be available to you. So you don't need to worry about taking a screenshot or anything. All the links will be embedded in the PDF that you'll be able to download from the site. So this, for the most part, the C2C Care site is aimed at small institutions, small to maybe mid-size. And in looking at the list of people who registered, as well as for the people who participated in the survey, I would say that many people represented on both lists are sort of above the normal profile of the C2C Care user. So, 20% of the respondents aren't using loggers or logging systems yet. 80% who are have a range of some very high tech and expensive options. But for the most part of the 80% of you who are logging, 40% have fewer than 10 loggers. Some mention that they're using hundreds across multiple buildings or sites, but the median number of loggers per respondent was 15 and the mean was 23. So if you're a mid-sized museum, this is still, a pretty reasonable number. Enough preaching to the choir about, why we're monitoring. I found it interesting, at least in our small sample set, also that people are mostly focused in on temperature and relative humidity logging, but it's a good opportunity to remind people that loggers can provide additional information that can be useful to us. A number of you are monitoring light levels or UV light or on and off, which I suspect may be also related to light use. Monitoring light levels or exposure accumulation can help us advocate for important preservation protocols like rotation of items on display, window shades or films, or motion sensors. One colleague who I spoke to in preparation for this presentation reported that the light monitoring that one of their clients was doing allowed the institution to improve security protocols when it was realized that guards weren't always doing their inspection rounds at night, which should have activated the motion sensor lights. So it can help with security as well. Vibration monitoring can help protect collections during construction or special events or transport. Dew point, which many loggers actually monitor or calculate even if you don't realize it, is critical data for engineers who are evaluating the performance of HVAC systems. And carbon dioxide monitoring is an example of pollutant monitoring, which can tell us, the health of our air quality, whether we're getting enough air exchanges to keep people healthy in our spaces, prevent buildup of off-gassing, and more. The data analysis of some of these other factors can get complex, and so you have to be willing to put in the time to make investment in these other kinds of data points meaningful. It's also important to point out that generally cheaper loggers will only do one thing, or in the case of temperature and RH, that's actually two things. But more advanced loggers will accommodate, more than one parameter. So it might be temperature, relative humidity, and light, or even allow for an external sensor to be added in. So this slide is probably what most people were sort of interested in attending this webinar for. Again, I will let you know that the PDF will include a link to all of the websites that are mentioned here. So on this slide, I've listed the loggers that were mentioned in all the survey responses, along with products mentioned in the C2C Care online community and the Global Conservation Forum over the last few years. Based on the institutions, again, represented in the respondents, it's important to point out that not all of these products are available in all countries. We had a lot of international responses. And given what we're seeing now in terms of tariffs and over the last 5 years with supply chain disruptions, I highly recommend ensuring that you're purchasing a product that has a reliable supplier in your country. That said, there are some really interesting newer companies that out of Europe that clearly, from what I've heard, are trying to break into the U.S. market, and so it's going to be interesting to track those over time. I said I wouldn't go into depth on the technology, or at least not like I did in the 2016 webinar, but I do want to clarify a few terms before we talk about several products. So what I call standalone data loggers are units that operate independently, and in some manner you have to download the data to view the results. These units can be wireless, meaning they're not plugged in, but they aren't interconnected or part of a larger system. So examples of this would be older generation hobos that you needed like a USB port or cable, the PEM2s, and some of the early examples of like Bluetooth loggers and Wi-Fi loggers, like those seen here on the right. In contrast, we have connected systems. But it's important to understand that not all of these sensors are logging and storing the information. Some are merely sensing the information and then relaying it to the nearest collection point. These connected systems can be wireless, or they can also be hardwired into your Ethernet. But with connected systems, we're talking about those that communicate with a network and sometimes each other, which is often called a mesh system. They can transmit the data in various ways. They can use Wi-Fi or radio or cellular or wiring. And all of that information can go back to various points. It can go back to a specific computer, it can go back to a network, or it can go up to the cloud. And generally that communication is two ways. So 9 years after the last webinar, there are some changes in the technology landscape, and most systems, not all, but most, are now using the 3 transmission technologies in the red boxes. So that's Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, which everyone's familiar with from their earbuds and their phones, and also the LoRaWAN, which is a technology that also now is much more successful in using sort of low energy to throw signals much further than is possible with the other technologies. Based on the loggers listed by respondents and the numbers deployed, again, the audience that responded to the survey is a little bit more technologically advanced than our target C2C Care user. Many people seem to be using more than one model within a product line. For instance, more than one Testo loggers or a combination of Hobo MX 1101s and 1104s. For the 23% of responders who are using loggers from more than one company, and looking at the combinations of what people are using, I think these fall into 2 general categories. Users that are transitioning from one product to another, for instance, upgrading from a standalone logger to a real-time cloud-based system, or users that are supplementing a core product with other loggers for specific needs. So they'll have something for general long-term trend monitoring and another product, let's say, for microclimates. And then the third category is people who are transitioning from something that is no longer available. So I'd like to focus on a few of the products that came up, again, in these numbers. We have, again, out of the 73 responses of people who are logging, 12% were using conserve system, 26% have the preservation environment monitors, the PEM2s, the second generation monitors from the Image Permanence Institute. 56% are using one or more different kind of Hobo loggers from Onset, and 28% are using one of the other products that are listed in that long list on the page. So I'm not going to recommend anything, specific today, but I wanted to just touch a little bit more on why the products that come up frequently are why we see that. This is the PEM2 from eClimate Notebook. I think the first PEM came out. The IPI staff who are on this webinar will correct me in the chat, hopefully, but my memory was it was somewhere around 2000. So, certainly well over 20 years ago. And this was an amazing unit in that it really helped people transition away from the hygrothermographs to data loggers. You can see that you needed like a flash drive to insert into And there to collect the data that went to your computer, and you uploaded that to to originally the Climate Notebook software, which transitioned to the eClimate Notebook, a web-based application to look at your data. The battery life was really long. The Image Permanence Institute did this as part of all of their research into the permanence and preserving of collections. And the work that they did with the grant bodies and the foundations meant that this was a product created specifically for us, for our community, and it was enormously successful. But a few years ago, IPI stopped. They're still supporting the ones that are in use, but you can't buy these anymore, and they are reaching, many of them, if they haven't already, they're reaching their natural lifespan. So for those of you in that 26% who still have PEM2s, that's great as long as they are chugging along. But from the data in the survey form, many of you are finding that things are getting glitchy, or you're having trouble with these units. And this is really now the time that you need to be planning for replacing them and figuring out what comes next. Conserve loggers are one of the products that did not exist in 2016. The company, I believe, was formed in 2018. And Conserve is also a company that is focused on the heritage preservation market. They are of us and for us, which is unusual because most other data logger firms are tailored towards environmental applications, pharmaceutical applications, and food service industry. That's where the money is. And so some of them, like the cultural heritage industry, because we're groovy and our projects are fun and neat, and sometimes they're technologically challenging. But Conserve is a company that offers hardware with a good quality sensor. It measures temperature, RH, light, and now sensor movement. And they're aggressively advancing and improving their software to make it user-friendly and accessible to cultural heritage professionals. Their business model and their customer support are focused on our field, and their goal is to make heritage monitoring easy and understandable. Another series of products that have a long history in our field are the hobo loggers. I still, when I go and do assessments, I see many generations of hobo loggers in institutions. And so if you have ones that don't look like these here, and they're still chugging along, that's great. But what you're seeing here are the Bluetooth loggers. Actually, on the left are the last generation, which require a USB offload, and then the sort of the two in the middle are the MX1101 and the 1104. They both are Bluetooth loggers, and the difference here is a little bit in the 1104 allows for light monitoring like the Conserve sensors do too. It has a bit more of a robust casing, which allows it to be in slightly harsher environments than the 1101. And you'll see that the difference in the casing, if you look at specifically at the specs, also has some influence on the plus or minus factor in the accuracy. So the 1101, I believe, is like a plus or minus 2 in terms of its relative humidity accuracy, whereas the 1104 has a plus or minus of 2.5 because that more robust casing makes a difference. This is still really accurate for the purposes, I think, for which most of us are monitoring. So whether, which one you would choose should depend on other factors, not on that, 0.5%. What you see over on the right here is peeking around sort of next to the laptop screen is what's called a gateway. And the gateway is what allows you to turn these standalone Bluetooth loggers into a real-time monitoring system, which puts the information up into the cloud for you. And I'll come back to that in a little bit. So what else? That slide that listed all the loggers had a lot of products, some of which I'm familiar with and I've used before, and others which were new to me. And it was really interesting to see the range of things that people were using. Many of the things that I have used before, though, came up multiple times. So that includes things like the Testo line, the Severus 2, and some of the others in the Testo line. There's multiple T&D loggers that are used widely in our field. TinyTag, which is not an American company, but they've been around a long time. On the bottom right, we have the Lascar EL Wi-Fi loggers, and there's others in that series. And so all of these are products where the companies have come, they've been vendors at the AIC annual meeting, they have representatives who have worked with institutions. And they know our products, and their product lines have continued to evolve as the technology has evolved. So, these are good, products. Some of them are higher end and more expensive than others. In the bottom center here, we have Vaisala sensors. Vaisala is, one of the big names in precision sensing. And on the left, we have, two things that were new to me and are sort of intriguing. On the top left, this is called, I think it is Char. They have two loggers here. They're teeny tiny. One is a mini Bluetooth and the other is a LoRaWAN logger. This company is based out of Belgium. They actually, I think, sell their loggers rather than essentially renting them as part of a subscription service. And so that's an interesting business model. And again, it will be, I'm sort of intrigued to see how they enter the US market. And on the bottom left is the Bev Art, which is a very high end and highly priced, but and it's hard to see here because it's out of scale, but it is teeny tiny. So again, all of these products are ones that will take measurements. They will take measurements for temperature and relative humidity, and often light and some other factors to a degree of accuracy and repeatability that is more than sufficient for most of our purposes. And so again, it's really a question of matching the features that each of these loggers have and their price points with your need. So what are we doing with our data? There was a really wide range of responses in the survey, from nothing to daily or even weekly updates with facilities departments. So again, I really want to emphasize that you should not be making a year-long project out of picking a data logger. What you should be making a year-long project of is collecting data and looking at it in a way that is going to be useful to you. So let's talk a little bit about then the software component and how we're looking at our data. From the respondents to the survey, almost half, 46%, are using eClimate Notebook. Another sort of, more than a third are using Excel or Google Sheets. And then people who are using Conserve are using Conserve, and others who are not using Conserve may also be loading their information into the Conserve software, which is a feature that they provide. And then some people who are using the Dataloggers are using HoboLink, which is the web-based platform as well. And then some are using nothing. So let's just look a little bit about what each of these platforms provide. We're going to start with Excel or Google Sheets. So many of the loggers now actually provide some sort of app or software package which allows you to launch and download the data, but they're not providing a complete software package for you to be able to analyze or graph or print out the data. They're assuming that you're downloading it and you're putting it into something like Excel or Google Sheets, and you're doing the analysis there. So I'd be curious to hear from some of the people who said that they're using Excel or Google Sheets to know, are you graphing this? Are you analyzing the data in Excel or in one of these spreadsheet programs? Or are you just like looking at the raw data and scrolling through, the columns of data that you download from your loggers? A few of the programs still, like Onset's HoboLoggers, do create graphs. The T&D, Testo, and LastCard do, as well. As you can see from the phone screenshot on the right, though, it's really difficult to make heads or tails of this data on your phone. In this case, the graph is auto-scaled, which makes it seem like your data is crazy, even when it may not be actually so volatile. And what you're seeing on the left here, again, is this Hobo link that if you have the Hobo Bluetooth loggers, you can download them onto your phone or your iPad or your mobile device. But if you put them up to the HoboLink, or if you're using a gateway which puts them up to the cloud, you can set up dashboards now that allow you to do a limited amount of graphing and visualization of current readings. So the thing that I want to mention here is for people who may have had a gateway or have been using this, is that they have changed their business model. So it used to be that you just paid one fee for the gateway, and at some point Onset realized that they were losing money this way, and so they've changed it now that that you must pay a $25 fee per logger per year. So in my case, in our studio, we have 3 Hobo loggers, and so that's going to be $75 per year. Before February, I think it was, just using the gateway cost $75. So for 3 or fewer loggers, you're still at sort of the same price point. But if you have multiple loggers that you were using with a gateway, your the cost is going to change for you. And I will say, if you are a long-standing gateway Bluetooth Hobo user, and you have questions about your bill, I encourage you to reach out to the company to discuss pricing options. To really get the benefit of your data, though, I strongly advocate for using a platform or a program that adds analytical tools and understanding to your data. eClimate Notebook is the OG cloud-based software for analysis of environmental data. And again, for over 25 years, IPI has worked on foundational research on environmental monitoring. They've created preservation metrics to explain and analyze environmental conditions. And users of the Image Permanence Institute's eClimate Notebook have anxiously been awaiting the new upgraded version of this popular software platform since 2023. And the most recent delays were outside of IPI's control as they waited for a major update to the hosting environment at Rochester Institute of Technology, the university of which they're a part. And delaying the launch of this new eClimate Notebook was intended to ensure that there would be no disruption for users when they move to this permanent digital space. This digital move, if I understand correctly, happened earlier this week, and so I am hopeful that the new eClimate Notebook will be launched before the end of the year. IPI's relaunch page includes the updated pricing structure and a preview video of the new software, which shows some exciting improvements. The software will accept CSV formatted files, and IPI has arranged for a partnership discount with Onset for easy import of Hobo logger data. This is going to be a two-step process, meaning that you're going to have to export your data from your logger, whatever type you're using, and import it into eClimate Notebook. However, the relaunch site should offer improved field mapping to streamline this process. And the links here, when you have the PDF, will take you to the video that shows you some of these features and the relaunch page. And what you're seeing on the right here is an example of one of the old report forms, which shows the graphing and the performance graphs and the statistical analysis that I think are so valuable and that you don't get with just using something like many of the other logger software programs. Over the past years, as many institutions search for an alternative to the PEM2 and eClimate Notebook combo, many of them moved over to Conserve. And Conserve aims to streamline the collection care work with both integrated hardware and software. They also offer interactive charts and metrics and reports. And their software also accommodates import of CSV data, allowing Conserve users to maintain use of legacy loggers. And as a co-chair of the Museum Pest Working Group, I will mention that their software also accommodates pest monitoring data using the Museum Pest Image Gallery to aid in identification. Conserve also has a team of professionals experienced in and focused on cultural heritage, and they provide really robust support. So only 5% of respondents are unhappy with their current product. A bit over 20% are seen to be happy, but the colorful large slice here, the colorful slices are sort of like more iterations of yes, but, which adds up to about 73% who are basically content but wish their product did something else. And so I was trying to tease out over time what that something else would be. But some of those things, we should recognize that there have been a lot of changes over the last decade. For the most part, cost has come down. There's, again, viable loggers that you can get for, $30. But I want to make sure that people also understand that that you can spend, $30 or even $10 on a logger, and you can spend $900. Most of the connected and cloud systems, there's generally either a base cost or a subscription cost, as opposed to standalone loggers where you're paying for, the single unit. But there is a reason why loggers are priced the way they are. The more the bells and whistles, the greater the price. And so there is reason for having, many cheap loggers or a fewer high-end loggers. Um, as long as you don't expect an inexpensive product to perform the same as a high-end product, you won't be disappointed with a mismatch. So again, valid uses for both ends of the spectrum. But it's about matching your goals and reasons for analysis with the product and your budget. Other things that have improved over the last decade is transmission. Again, whether you're using Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, which is like a near field technology, or LoRaWAN, is going to have an impact on how far you can throw the signal. When you look at what the companies say in terms of signal transmission, most of them are giving you a reading in sort of like an open field or an empty warehouse. The minute you start putting up steel shelving or walls or other things, that transmission distance is going to shorten. So it's important to understand, the building and environment in which you are trying to throw a signal back to a collection point. The size of loggers has gotten smaller, and in general, battery life has gotten longer. So those are some of the nice improvements as time has gone on. Most of you are doing general trend monitoring in the building, trying to understand your spaces. A smaller selection have identified microclimates, and then some special, projects or all of the above. So, again, some things that I want to remind everyone, know what you want to do with your data. It drives me a little bonkers when people go on to one of the listservs and say, tell me, I have some money, what should I buy? And people will throw out, they'll say, I love this product, or I'm happy with this. Unless you understand, what it is that you want to do, what it is you're monitoring, what your budget is, what your IT infrastructure is, those recommendations may or may not be appropriate, for you. If you have an IT person or department, you need to have them on board. Many times, if you're thinking of investing, it's worth buying one logger to see if that system really works within your building with the construction that you have. And making sure that you advocate for your own time and sanity, understanding, how long it would take for you to walk around and download individual loggers, with a Bluetooth connection versus having things up to the cloud and being able to export them automatically to you. So a few of the future trends that, everybody's talking about AI, and I think some of the things that is going to be really interesting to see, especially when I talk to the colleagues at Conserve, are things like, will AI be able to detect anomalies in the data? Will we be able to use AI to query our data? To ask questions about different spaces. Can AI be useful in assessing our, machinery or air handling, our HVAC unit capacities? So those are some things that will be interesting to see over the next few years. I think there's going to be more apps and more mobile functionality, more that we can do, from our phones and mobile devices. And everything really is moving in the way of, more subscription-based products and less standalone. So again, what I really want to leave you with is the fact that there's so many products out there. The one that provides the data that you need to answer the questions that you have to address is going to be a decent product for you. And, that could be a high-end cloud-based system, or it could be a few standalone data loggers, and that's okay. Don't spend a year trying to figure out the best logger. Get something, put it in, start collecting data, and take a look at it. Hopefully, with one of the great platforms that provides these extra analytical tools. I want to thank some of the colleagues that answered my call when I asked about their products. I want to thank all of you who answered the survey. And we have some time for questions, right, Robin? I'll point out that these were some of the kinds of things that were mentioned a lot in the comments, issues about calibration, issues about accuracy, what does that mean, ±2 versus 2.5 or 3? I again want to point out for those who are still mystified about dew point or what to do with their data, that March 17th webinar by Maddie Cooper is really a good complement to this presentation, and IPI's dew point calculator is a fun thing to play around with. And I think, again, it's worth, looking at the ability to load information into Conserve or investigate the new eClimate Notebook features to really understand why those programs are useful in communicating data that will help you advocate for change or upgrades or maintenance to your systems. And the last thing is, again, be prepared for long-term budgeting. Some of these pieces of equipment can last a long time, but it's, we are in sort of a disposable culture right now, for better or for worse. Most of these loggers cannot, are not meant to be recalibrated. The recalibration cost would be more expensive than buying a new logger. So making sure that you're keeping an eye on long-term budgeting. Just to point out that there are, in addition to the C2C Care sites, there's some further education opportunities. Conserve offers their own community focused on preservation topics, and IPI has a webinar series that's coming up starting in May. And I encourage anyone with additional questions to reach out to me. And thank you for your time.
Thank you, Rachel. Yeah, I've been paying attention to the chat the entire time, and it's interesting to see kind of the comments people have been putting. So I'll make sure to pass that along to you. We have a couple minutes to do questions. So I wanted to go ahead and hit some of those. One of the ones that came up in a couple different ways were to see basically, are people using loggers, or do you know of any loggers that work with the building management systems? I know oftentimes in our larger facilities, people have like HVAC systems that are already set up and have a BMS, as they're sometimes called, already set up. Have you heard about any of these data collecting programs working with the BMS, or people just using their BMSs, or what's your kind of thought on that?
So it's interesting. I think, there are, I believe Jim Riley, who, sort of started the climate notebook at IPI, sort of came full circle on the idea of, standalone logging versus, working with or getting data from the BMS system. I mean, ideally, we want to be working together in collaboration with our facility staff, and there's a variety of ways to do that. Where BMS sensors are placed is not always the same as the data that we're interested in. Most of those sensors are designed to give facility staff an understanding of how their equipment is operating. And that may or may not be telling us the same kind of data as like what our collections are feeling sitting on the shelves. So some of the BMS systems can handle sort of the logging functions, and for others, it really like slows down their system, and the facilities staff don't like doing that. So I think it's really important. Again, this is hopefully the process of monitoring and discussing your environment is a collaborative one and not one that's, adversarial with trying to pit your data against their data. But most of these, products are, are independent of a BMS. But some of them are small enough to be placed in ductwork or integrated, into a larger system, something like the Visala sensors and things like that.
Perfect, thank you. Yeah, that's what a lot of people in the chat seem to be saying, is that sometimes the sensors are just in places I don't want to say they don't care about, but it's not the ones that we're really trying to think about and monitor, which is important. And just I know when I've worked in facilities where when I had to go through maintenance to pull the information, it took a lot longer. Meanwhile, I could just go to a sensor and just pull the data myself, which seemed to be a little faster of a process as well. So that's something to consider. We've had a couple people asking about how often you should calibrate the sensors. I'm guessing that kind of varies, but I didn't know if you had any thoughts on that as well.
So I think there's a question about calibrating or checking the calibration. So again, generally only like the higher end sensors allow you to actually self-calibrate or are worth sending back for calibration. Many of the others are not designed to do that. Like, calibration generally costs like a couple $100 if it's being done by the company, and that's not necessarily even a NIST calibration. So anything under that is designed to, basically be used until it no longer works. So, it was interesting speaking to one of the company representatives. He said, they're using precision parts and their digital sensors should be good for 10 years without, calibration, as long as the logger is in sort of normal, room conditions and is not excessively dusty. So over time, though, it's generally the RH sensor that's going to drift, and they often tend to, drift on, higher. But it does seem that, many of these loggers are lasting longer. I have tended to sort of sometimes collect them, you know, I would like to say annually, but it doesn't really ever happen annually, but maybe every couple years. And sometimes that may just be putting them all on the desk just to see that they're measuring the same. But I also have calibrated salt solutions set up so I can cycle them through sort of a low RH, a mid, and a high RH system just to sort of check to see how they're doing. For the 2016 webinar, Samantha Alderson at American Museum of Natural History and I actually did put all of the loggers that we looked at for that program through three, chambers just to see whether they were performing accurately within the specs that the vendors set. So I would say that if things are working fine and they're in good condition, if you can check them annually, that's great. But most of the companies now are saying, you shouldn't need to do that, um, you know, that annually is great if you can do it. But, even 3+ years, they would say that it should still be measuring within their specs.
Perfect, thank you. Well, I'm going to have to wrap up today's program because.
Can I say one other thing?
Yeah.
I just saw like passing through in the chat that a number of people are having trouble with that Hobo Lycor transition. Hobo OnSite was very good with their technical support for a very long time. It has been somewhat less personal since COVID and with some staffing changes, but I was able to to get help it is not a well-documented change. And I have been very vocal about that, and I encourage other people to do the same. But, once you get through this process of signing up for the new data plan, and understanding what information needs to go into the app versus the HoboLink website, it does come back online and seem to work fine.
Perfect. Thank you. Well, huge thank you for doing this program today. We've had a couple people asking about the resources and presentation from today's program. We'll be posting those on the website I linked in the chat by early tomorrow, along with the recording for this session. So all of that will be on there, and we'll make an announcement once they're available. So you'll be able to get all that fun information by tomorrow. So yeah, thank you.
Robin, are you able to export some of the questions that we didn't have a chance to? And I can maybe write some of those up that can also join the resource page.
For sure. I'll be able to pull those reports as well. So I'd be happy to do it, because yeah, there are still some questions, but unfortunately we've run out of time. So, but again, thank you, Rachel, for your time today and for revisiting this topic that you've been around for over 30 years with. I'm sure you'll be here for another 30 years talking about data loggers.
Oh, I'm not sure about that.
In the future, when we
hopefully someone else will geek out on this topic and take over.
We'll come to, we'll get the webinar beamed directly into our heads when that happens 30 years from now. So that'll be good. So thanks again to everyone for coming today. Thanks again to FAIC, to the CRESS group and anonymous donors for supporting C2C Care. We really do appreciate it. We'll be announcing more of our schedule in the next couple of weeks. So thanks everyone, and we will see you in a couple of weeks for our May Day webinar as well. So thanks, and see you soon.